In 1954, psychologist Gordon Allport published a book called The Nature of Prejudice, in which he concluded that most people are inclined to some level of prejudgment. Modern cognitive science has given us more insight into how we may be predisposed or biologically designed to be prejudiced. How have human brains evolved to think about the world? Imagine you were faced with these objects. How would you understand them? Each separately, or would you group similar objects together into categories? It turns out that we quickly and easily group similar objects into categories in order to understand the world in more efficient ways. Without this ability and tendency, the world would be too complex and our decision making would be too slow. Think about early man having to understand the wide variety of things he might encounter in a day. As he experiences the world, he would start to group things into categories that made sense and make decision making faster and simpler. He might group all things that could be food together and all things that were dangerous together, and he would need to make these judgments quickly in order to increase his chance for survival. This ability and tendency was advantageous and selected for generation after generation, and it is evidenced in how our brain operates today. It is our natural tendency to categorize our world, and it makes sense that we would categorize people. It's also our tendency to fear that which is different from us. Imagine how this behavior would have evolved. Early humans lived in small groups of hunters and gatherers. They would often be in competition with other small groups of humans who might do them harm. Those that were unfamiliar to themselves were to be mistrusted and avoided, or the consequences could be deadly. Our brains are hardwired to be wary of strangers from about the time we can walk and move away from the safety of our parents. This is seen across cultures as a stage in our cognitive development. We categorize and understand similarities and differences. There is a cognitive root to this. But what about the cognitive root of the more negative aspects of racism? Why do we stereotype and treat others differently based on these categorizations? Is that also hardwired into psychology? What shapes our attitudes, and what determines our behaviors towards groups we recognize as different? It turns out we can look to cognitions for clues to this as well. When we make judgments, we often employ heuristics, mental shortcuts based on past experience. Two of the most commonly used heuristics are the representative heuristic and the availability heuristic. When we use the representative heuristic, we make judgments based on how well some person or event represents a stereotype. And when we use the availability heuristic, we judge things based on how easily information comes to mind. And often, vivid cases of people acting poorly come to mind more easily. That, combined with our grouping tendencies, leads us to prejudge. Keep in mind that in most decision-making opportunities, these shortcuts work and have served us well in the past, so their use becomes the default process for forming judgments. It turns out this becomes more important when we are unsure of what to think. In a recent article, Roets and Van Hiles described that people who aren't comfortable with ambiguity and want to make firm decisions are also prone to making generalizations about others. They argue that this comes from a need to categorize the world, even if unconsciously. Another area where psychology has tried to explain prejudice and discrimination is in how we understand and explain social injustice. It is a human tendency to rationalize why things are the way they are. To serve our need to see ourselves in a positive light, we develop attitudes that justify the inequalities that favor us. The subtle or not so subtle in-group out-group biases are used to explain why one group of people are not as well off as another. If the marginalized group acts out in protest due to their frustrations, their actions are used as justification as to why they are being mistreated in the first place. It's like, look how they were acting. They deserve to be treated like criminals. And we also need scapegoats. We need someone to blame when things aren't going well, and it's more comfortable when those to blame don't belong to the group we identify with. We commonly teach children that good is rewarded and evil is punished, the just world phenomenon. Be a good person and good things will happen to you. It is a short cognitive leap to those who succeed must be good, and those who suffer must be bad. So our brains are designed to have these automatic tendencies, but they don't dictate that we should act on them or excuse when we do. It isn't inevitable that we are racist, but we do have to work to be aware of these cognitive tendencies and consciously evaluate how we understand the world. We have to actively look past the categorizations and question how we are forming judgments.